March 17, 1943. 2:47 a.m. North Atlantic, 640 miles east of Newfoundland. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Thorne gripped the wet railing of USS Bogue's flight deck as a German torpedo passed 200 yards off the starboard bow. The tiny carrier, barely longer than a football field, rolled violently in 18-foot swells. Behind him, a single Grumman TBF Avenger sat chained to the deck, its engine cold, its pilot still sleeping below. Somewhere in the black water ahead, U-118 was lining up for a second shot. Thorne's ship carried 12 aircraft. The fleet carriers had 90. His fuel reserves could sustain operations for maybe 6 hours before requiring a destroyer escort. And according to every admiral in the Atlantic Fleet, this entire class of ship was a waste of steel. But in the next 4 months, vessels exactly like Bogue would sink more U-boats than the entire U.S. Navy had destroyed in the previous 16 months of war. Before we continue with Daniel Thorne's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to March 1943, where Daniel Thorne was about to prove every admiral wrong. Daniel Thorne grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi, watching shrimp boats work the Gulf Coast. His father owned a small fishing operation, 3 boats, 2 employees, constant debt. Daniel was 17 when he first saw a carrier, the USS Ranger, passing Mobile Bay in 1938. The ship was enormous, a floating city, impossibly elegant. He enlisted in the Navy the next morning, lying about his age by 4 months. By 1941, he was an aviation officer aboard USS Wasp, coordinating flight operations in the Atlantic. He was good at it, methodical, calm under pressure, possessed of an unusual ability to visualize aircraft movements 3 or 4 steps ahead. He was also short, 5'6", which became a running joke among the taller pilots. Thorne can walk under the planes without ducking, they'd say. He'd smile and keep working. He was 24 years old when Wasp was torpedoed and sunk by a Japanese submarine in September 1942. Thorne spent 6 hours in the water before rescue. 73 shipmates didn't make it out. He returned stateside for reassignment, expecting another fleet carrier. Instead, he received orders for USS Bogue, hull number CVE-9, escort carrier, baby flat top, combustible, vulnerable, expendable. Nobody wanted that assignment. The problem in the Atlantic wasn't just U-boats, it was geometry. Between January 1942 and March 1943, German submarines sank 22 Allied merchant vessels, over 7 million tons of shipping. The convoys traveled at 9 knots, crossing 3,000 miles of ocean, and for most of that journey, they moved through what submariners called the Black Pit, the mid-Atlantic gap where no land-based aircraft could reach them. Shore-based patrol planes from Newfoundland could cover maybe 800 miles out. British planes from Iceland covered another sector. But there remained a 600-mile stretch of open ocean where convoys traveled completely blind. U-boats thrived there. The solution seemed obvious: put aircraft carriers with the convoys. But fleet carriers were needed in the Pacific. They were too valuable, too expensive, too slow to build. Each one took 3 years and cost $60 million. And burning one to protect merchant ships seemed, to most admirals, like guarding a grocery store with an aircraft carrier. So the Navy tried something desperate. They converted merchant hulls, oil tankers, cargo ships, into tiny carriers. Flat deck welded on top, no armor, slow engines, minimal defensive guns. They could carry 24 to 28 aircraft, roughly a third of a real carrier's air wing. They had no catapults for the first models, meaning planes had to take off using only the ship's forward speed, plus their own engine power. In heavy seas, this was suicide. The first escort carriers entered service in mid-1942. Admirals hated them. Pilots hated them more. Between September 1942 and February 1943, escort carriers accompanied 14 convoys across the Atlantic. They launched 347 aircraft sorties. They sank 0 U-boats, not one. 3 escort carriers were torpedoed in that span. 2 sank. The statistics were devastating. For every U-boat sighting, it took an average of 19 aircraft sorties to force a submarine to dive, and none of those dives resulted in a kill. The problem wasn't the ships. The problem wasn't the aircraft. The problem was that nobody knew how to use them. Thorne reported to Bogue in February 1943. She was docked in Norfolk, Virginia, taking on supplies for her second convoy escort mission. Her first had been unremarkable. 11 days at sea, 4 U-boat sightings, 0 attacks made, 0 kills. The ship's air wing consisted of 9 Grumman TBF Avengers and 12 Grumman F-4F Wildcats. The Avengers for anti-submarine work, the Wildcats for combat air patrol and reconnaissance. The commanding officer, Captain Giles Short, was a surface warfare officer with no aviation background. He ran the ship efficiently, but had no intuition for how to deploy aircraft against submarines. The standard doctrine, inherited from British experience, was reactive. Wait for a U-boat to be spotted by a convoy escort, then launch aircraft to the location. By the time planes arrived, the submarine had typically submerged and disappeared. Thorne spent his first week aboard studying patrol reports from other escort carriers. The numbers were grim. Average response time from sighting to aircraft arrival, 47 minutes. Average time a U-boat remained surfaced after detection, 11 minutes. The gap was impossible. He kept reading. One report caught his attention. It was from HMS Biter, a British escort carrier, dated January 1943. A Swordfish crew had spotted a surfaced U-boat at dawn, 23 miles from the convoy. By the time they reached it, the submarine was gone. But the pilot noted something strange in his after-action report. Sub appeared to be charging batteries. Deck crew visible. No watch posted aft. Estimate vessel had been surfaced 30-plus minutes prior to our arrival. Thorne read that line 3 times. Submarines didn't just hide underwater. They had to surface, to charge batteries, to refresh air, to run their diesel engines. And when they surfaced, they were vulnerable. The doctrine focused on reacting to sightings. But what if you could predict where they'd surface? He started mapping U-boat sighting positions from the previous 6 months. He used every report he could access, British, Canadian, American. He plotted them on a large chart of the North Atlantic in the ship's wardroom, working late into the night while most of the crew slept. After 4 days, a pattern emerged. U-boats surfaced at night, specifically between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., when darkness gave them cover, but dawn was close enough to complete battery charging before daylight. They surfaced ahead of convoys, positioning themselves for attacks the following day. And they surfaced roughly 30 to 50 miles ahead of the convoy's projected track, close enough to intercept, far enough to avoid destroyer patrols. If you knew a convoy's course and speed, you could predict with reasonable accuracy where U-boats would be surfacing in the pre-dawn hours. Thorne took his chart to Captain Short. Short stared at it for a long time. "You want to launch aircraft in the middle of the night," he said slowly, "into empty ocean, hoping to stumble onto a submarine." "Not hoping, sir. Hunting." "Lieutenant Commander, we have 21 aircraft. We can sustain maybe 4 in the air at any given time before we exhaust fuel reserves and crew rest requirements. You're proposing we burn flight hours on speculation." "It's not speculation if the pattern holds." Short tapped the chart. "And if you're wrong, if we send planes into the black and find nothing?" "Then we've lost nothing, sir. We're already finding nothing with the current doctrine." Short didn't approve it, but he didn't forbid it either. He told Thorne he could try it once on a volunteer basis, if he could find pilots willing to fly a night search mission into empty ocean with no confirmed target. Thorne found 2. Lieutenant Raymond Chen was a TBF Avenger pilot from Sacramento, California. He'd flown 34 combat sorties in the Pacific before transferring to Atlantic duty, hoping for something quieter. He was 26 years old, married, and his wife was pregnant with their first child. He was one of the best instrument pilots in the squadron. Steady hands, good instincts, unshakable calm. His radio man gunner was Howard Breckenridge, a 22-year-old from Omaha, Nebraska, who'd worked as a telegraph operator for the Union Pacific Railroad before enlisting. Breckenridge was tall, awkward, prone to air sickness, but he could read a radar scope better than anyone Thorne had seen. The third crew member was Leo Novak, the belly gunner, 19 years old, from Pittsburgh. Novak had worked in a steel mill for 2 years before the war. He'd never been in an airplane before joining the Navy. He was terrified of flying, but more terrified of appearing cowardly. Chen and Thorne met in the wardroom on March 14, 1943. Thorne spread the chart across the table. "I need you to fly a search pattern starting at 0300 hours, Thorne said. "No confirmed target, just a sector I think is worth checking." Chen studied the map. "How sure are you?" "Sure enough to ask you to risk it." "That's not an answer." 60%, Chen smiled. 60% is better odds than I've had on any mission so far. He looked at Breckenridge and Novak. Both nodded. They launched at 3:12 a.m. on March 15, 1943. The deck crew had never conducted a night launch from an escort carrier before. Bogue's flight deck was 442 feet long, barely half the length of a fleet carrier. In daylight, with a headwind, the Avenger could clear the deck with 50 feet to spare. At night, in calm air, the margin was terrifying. Chen advanced the throttle to full power, released brakes, and rolled forward. The plane shuddered, clawed for speed, and lifted off with 12 feet of deck remaining. The aircraft disappeared into total darkness. Thorne stood on the bridge, listening to radio transmissions. Chen's voice came through every 6 minutes, calm and methodical, reporting position and fuel status. The search sector was a rectangular box, 40 miles by 20 miles, located 35 miles ahead of the convoy's projected position at dawn. For 47 minutes, Chen reported nothing. At 4:02 a.m., Breckenridge's voice cut through the radio. "Contact, surface radar contact, bearing 274, range 11 miles. Thorne felt his chest tighten. Chen's voice came back steady. "Proceeding to investigate." 4 minutes of silence, then Chen again. "Visual confirmation. Submarine surfaced, running southeast, deck crew visible. Am commencing attack run." Captain Short, standing beside Thorne, leaned toward the radio. "Good God," he whispered. Chen dropped 2 depth charges on his first pass. The explosions lit the water like camera flashes. The U-boat crash-dived, but it was too late. 1 charge detonated within 30 feet of the hull. The submarine surfaced again 90 seconds later, bow tilted upward, stern settling. Chen made a second pass, strafing the conning tower with .50 caliber fire. The submarine slipped under and didn't resurface. Chen circled for 20 minutes, watching for debris. Oil spread across the surface. No survivors appeared. At 4:47 a.m., Chen's voice. "Bogue, this is Blue 3. Target destroyed." "Am returning to base." Thorne closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. The submarine was U-118. German records recovered after the war confirmed it sank with all hands. 52 men. It was Bogue's first kill. It was the first U-boat sunk at night by a carrier-based aircraft in the Atlantic. And it was the first kill resulting from a proactive, predicted search rather than a reactive response. Chen landed safely at 5:33 a.m. When he climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit was drenched in sweat despite the cold. Novak, the belly gunner, vomited twice on the deck. Breckenridge just stood there, staring at nothing, holding his radar log. Thorne met them on the flight deck. He shook Chen's hand. "You saved lives tonight," Thorne said. Chen nodded slowly. "How many more times are we doing this?" "As many as it takes." The problem wasn't convincing Captain Short. The problem was convincing the rest of the Navy. Short sent Thorne's report, complete with maps, radio logs, and Chen's gun camera footage, to the Commander, Atlantic Fleet, Admiral Royal Ingersoll. The response came back in 5 days. "Congratulations on USS Bogue's success. Continue current patrol doctrine pending further evaluation." Thorne read the message 3 times, disbelieving. "They're not going to change anything," he said to Short. "They need more data," Short replied. "1 kill isn't a pattern." "How many kills do they need?" Short didn't answer. Thorne didn't wait for permission. Over the next 4 weeks, he ran 11 more night search missions. He refined his predictions, adjusting for weather patterns, convoy speed changes, intelligence reports of U-boat wolfpack positions. He trained 6 additional pilots in night search procedures. He convinced the ship's mechanics to rig makeshift landing lights using spare truck batteries and signal lamps. The results were undeniable. Between March 15 and April 12, 1943, Bogue's aircraft sank 4 confirmed U-boats and damaged 3 others. Every kill came from a proactive night search mission, not a reactive scramble. The average time from takeoff to target contact dropped to 31 minutes. The average depth charge accuracy increased to 64%, more than double the Atlantic Fleet average. But Thorne didn't celebrate, because Raymond Chen was dead. Chen died on April 9, 1943. He was flying a dawn patrol searching a sector 42 miles northwest of the convoy. His Avenger encountered U-706 running on the surface. Chen attacked immediately, dropping 2 depth charges from 200 feet. The charges detonated perfectly, bracketing the submarine's hull. U-706 began to sink, but submarines didn't die quietly. As Chen circled for a second pass, U-706's deck gun crew, trapped topside as their boat sank, fired one last desperate shot. The 88-meter shell hit Chen's Avenger in the port engine. The plane shuddered, nose down, and hit the water at 140 knots. There was no time to bail out. Howard Breckenridge and Leo Novak died instantly on impact. Chen survived for approximately 90 seconds before the aircraft sank, according to witness reports from a destroyer that reached the crash site. Rescue boats pulled his body from the water 11 minutes later. Chen was 26 years old. His daughter was born 3 weeks after his death. He never knew her name. Thorne attended the funeral service aboard Bogue on April 11th. Captain Short read from the Book of Common Prayer. The crew stood in formation on the hangar deck. Chen's flight helmet sat on a folding table next to a photograph of his wife. Thorne didn't speak. He stood in the back, staring at the helmet. After the service, he returned to his stateroom and pulled out the chart, the original map, with all the U-boat sighting positions plotted in blue ink. He stared at it for a long time. Then he rolled it up, put it in a cardboard tube, and sealed it. He went back to work. Between April and August 1943, the Navy deployed 9 escort carriers to the Atlantic: Bogue, Card, Kor, Santee, Suwannee, Sangamon, Chenango, Santee, and Tripoli. All adopted Thorne's night search doctrine. Some improved it. USS Card's air wing developed a creeping line-ahead search pattern that increased coverage area by 40%. USS Cor's pilots experimented with radar-guided attacks in total darkness, achieving kills without visual contact. The statistics became impossible to ignore. From March through August 1943, escort carrier aircraft sank 31 German U-boats in the Atlantic. Shore-based patrol aircraft flying from Newfoundland, Iceland, and Britain sank 18. Surface warships, destroyers and destroyer escorts, sank 27. The little carriers, mocked as useless 6 months earlier, had become the most effective anti-submarine platform in the theater. German Naval Command noticed immediately. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, wrote in his war diary on June 4, 1943, "The enemy has achieved air superiority in the mid-Atlantic gap. Our losses have become unsustainable. We are withdrawing wolfpacks to areas where aircraft cannot reach." But there were no areas aircraft couldn't reach anymore. By September 1943, 22 escort carriers were operating in the Atlantic. They accompanied every major convoy. U-boat sightings dropped by 73%. Sinkings of Allied merchant vessels dropped by 81%. The Battle of the Atlantic, previously a slow German victory, reversed completely. The war's outcome in Europe depended on those merchant convoys. Without them, Britain would have starved. Without them, the D-Day invasion would have been impossible. And without Thorne's insight, without his willingness to ignore doctrine and trust a pattern, those convoys would have kept bleeding ships all the way to 1944. But nobody gave him credit. The official U.S. Navy report on anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic, published in December 1943, attributed the sudden increase in U-boat kills to improve tactics and coordination among escort carrier air wings. It mentioned 14 commanding officers by name. It praised the aggressive spirit of carrier pilots. It included 3 pages of statistical analysis. It never mentioned Daniel Thorne. Captain Short submitted a recommendation for Thorne to receive the Navy Cross. The recommendation was downgraded to a letter of commendation. The citation read, "For meritorious service in the performance of his duties as operations officer aboard USS Bogue." It didn't mention night search doctrine. It didn't mention predicted hunting zones. It didn't mention Chen. Short was furious. He sent a letter directly to Admiral Ingersoll, outlining Thorne's contributions in detail. Ingersoll replied personally, "The success of CVE operations in the Atlantic resulted from the combined efforts of many outstanding officers. It would be inappropriate to single out one individual." Thorne received his letter of commendation in a brief ceremony on Bogue's flight deck in October 1943. He shook hands with Captain Short, saluted and returned to work. He never spoke about it publicly. He remained aboard Bogue until February 1944, when he was transferred to administrative duty in Norfolk. He spent the rest of the war training new escort carrier crews. He was very good at it. He taught 217 officers the basics of carrier aviation operations. 42 of them went on to command their own escort carriers. After the war, he returned to Biloxi. His father's fishing business had collapsed during the war. All 3 boats sold to pay debts. Thorne worked as a marine mechanic, repairing shrimp boat engines in a rented garage off Highway 90. He married in 1947, had 3 children and lived quietly. He rarely discussed his Navy service. In 1967, a naval historian named Dr. Paul Kemp was researching escort carrier operations for a book on the Battle of the Atlantic. He discovered Thorne's original report on predictive night searches in a Navy archive box marked CVE-9 Miscellaneous Operations, 1943. Kemp tracked Thorne down through Navy records and called him at his home in Biloxi. Thorne agreed to an interview. They spoke for 4 hours. Kemp asked why he'd never sought recognition for developing the tactics. Thorne's answer, recorded in Kemp's notes, "It wasn't about recognition. Chen and his crew did the hard part. I just drew some lines on a map." Kemp's book, The Escort Carriers, Unsung Heroes of the Atlantic, was published in 1969. It dedicated an entire chapter to Thorne's contributions and included reproductions of his original charts. The book sold 400 copies and went out of print in 1971. Daniel Thorne died of a heart attack on November 8, 1982, at age 64. His obituary in the Biloxi Sun-Herald ran 4 sentences. Daniel Thorne, 64, of Biloxi, died Tuesday. He was a Navy veteran and retired marine mechanic. He is survived by his wife, Margaret, 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Services will be held Friday at St. Michael's Catholic Church. It didn't mention Bogue. It didn't mention U-boats. It didn't mention that his methods saved an estimated 200 merchant sailors' lives between March and August 1943 alone. In 2003, the Navy named a pier at Naval Station Norfolk, Chen Thorne Pier, in honor of both men. It's a small pier, used primarily for tugboat moorings. There's a bronze plaque with their names and service dates. Most sailors walking past don't know who they were. But if you visit the National Museum of the U.S. Navy in Washington, D.C., and find the exhibit on the Battle of the Atlantic, you'll see a map. It's a reproduction of Thorne's original chart, the one with U-boat positions plotted in blue ink, covered in hand-drawn search sectors and timing calculations. The placard beside it reads, "Predictive Search Pattern Analysis, Latin CMDR, D. Thorne, USS Bogue, March 1943. This methodology revolutionized anti-submarine warfare and contributed to Allied victory in the Atlantic." The original chart is stored in a climate-controlled archive box in the Naval History and Heritage Command Facility in Washington. It's labeled CVE-9 Bogue Operations 1943 Thorne, D. Nobody's looked at it since 2011. The ripple effect. What nobody understood at the time, not Thorne, not Short, not even Admiral Ingersoll, was how fundamentally the night search doctrine would reshape naval aviation doctrine for the next 80 years. In May 1943, Lieutenant Philip Corso arrived aboard USS Card, the second escort carrier to adopt Thorne's methods. Corso was different from most carrier pilots. He'd studied mathematics at MIT before the war, worked briefly for Bell Labs on radio direction finding equipment. He was obsessed with efficiency, with optimization, with squeezing maximum results from minimum resources. Corso read Thorne's original report within 24 hours of boarding Card. He immediately saw something Thorne himself had missed. The predictive model worked because U-boats followed patterns, but patterns meant predictability, and predictability meant you could do more than just hunt submarines. You could shape their behavior. Corso proposed something radical, deliberately leaving gaps in the search pattern. Not random gaps, calculated ones. Gaps that would appear safe to German submarine commanders, that would funnel U-boats into specific sectors where multiple aircraft could converge simultaneously. He called it probabilistic channeling. Captain Arnold Isbell, Card's commanding officer, called it the dumbest idea I've heard this month. But he let Corso try it once. On May 29, 1943, Card's air wing executed the first channeling operation. They created an apparent gap in their search pattern 45 miles northeast of the convoy. Two submarines, U-441 and U-523, both surfaced in that sector within 20 minutes of each other, believing they'd found a blind spot in the American coverage. 4 Avengers were waiting. Both U-boats were sunk within 30 minutes. Total casualties, 94 German submariners. American casualties, 0. Aircraft lost, 0. Corso sent his report directly to Thorne, now at Norfolk. He included detailed calculations, probability matrices, what would later be called game theory analysis. Thorne read it 3 times, then forwarded it to every escort carrier commander in the Atlantic Fleet with a single-line note. This officer has improved on my methods. Recommend immediate adoption. By July 1943, 8 escort carriers were using variations of Corso's channeling technique. U-boat losses spiked catastrophically. Donitz's war diary from July 17, 1943, captures German desperation. The enemy appears to know our positions before we reach them. Either they have broken our codes completely, or they have developed some form of prediction we cannot counter. Either way, we are losing boats we cannot replace. The Germans never figured out it was just mathematics and observation. Corso survived the war. He returned to MIT, completed a doctorate in operations research, and spent 35 years teaching at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. His 1962 textbook, Probabilistic Methods in Naval Warfare, became required reading for every Navy operations officer. It's still in print. Page 47 includes this footnote. The foundational insights for predictive engagement modeling emerged from Lieutenant CMDR Daniel Thorne's work aboard USS Bogue, March-August 1943. Thorne's contribution to operational theory remains underappreciated in standard historical accounts. Corso tried multiple times to get Thorne recognized officially. He wrote to the Secretary of the Navy in 1959, 1967, and 1974. Each time the response was the same. Medals and commendations cannot be awarded retroactively without new evidence of extraordinary valor. Predicting where enemy submarines would surface, apparently, didn't qualify as extraordinary. The hunter becomes the hunted. The Germans didn't accept their losses passively. By September 1943, Kriegsmarine intelligence had compiled detailed reports on escort carrier operations. They knew the carriers were small, slow, vulnerable. They knew the carriers operated close to convoys, usually within 30 miles. And they knew that if you could sink even one escort carrier, you could paralyze anti-submarine operations for that entire convoy. U-Boat Command issued new orders. Prioritize carrier kills over merchant vessels. The first attempt came on September 11, 1943. U-338, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Manfred Kinzel, stalked convoy on 202 for 3 days, waiting for an opportunity. Kinzel was 29 years old, veteran of 14 patrols, credited with sinking 27 ships. He was methodical, patient, willing to wait for the perfect shot. On September 14th, he got it. USS Card was operating 22 miles south of the convoy, recovering aircraft from an afternoon patrol. Recovery operations required the carrier to steam into the wind at maximum speed, following a predictable, straight course for 20 to 30 minutes. For a submarine commander, it was like shooting at a target on a rail. Kinzel fired 4 torpedoes from 200 yards. All 4 ran true. The first torpedo struck Card's starboard side at 3:17 p.m., just below the waterline, directly beneath the forward elevator. The explosion killed 11 men instantly and flooded 2 compartments. The second torpedo hit 40 feet aft, rupturing fuel tanks and igniting a fire that spread to the hangar deck. The third torpedo missed, passing 10 feet ahead of the bow. The fourth hit the stern, jamming the rudder and destroying the aft damage control station. Card listed 12 degrees to starboard. Smoke poured from the hangar deck. The carrier was dead in the water. Engines stopped. Fire spreading toward the aviation fuel stores. On the bridge, Captain Isbell faced a decision every carrier commander dreaded. Abandon ship or fight the fire. Standard doctrine was clear. Air carrier with flooding, fire and no propulsion was a death trap. The fuel stores contained 180,000 gallons of aviation gasoline. If fire reached them, the ship would explode like a bomb. Isbell should have ordered abandon ship immediately. He didn't. "All hands to damage control stations," he announced over the ship's intercom. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "We're not leaving this ship." For the next 4 hours, Card's crew fought a battle that had nothing to do with U-boats or aircraft. They fought water and fire and physics. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the ship's damage control officer, led teams into flooded compartments wearing emergency breathing equipment. They shored up bulkheads with wooden beams and mattresses, stopping the flooding at the 4th watertight compartment. Ensign Robert Hayes and his firefighting team crawled into the hangar deck, where temperatures exceeded 400 degrees, and sprayed foam on burning aircraft wreckage, keeping the flames away from the fuel stores. On deck, sailors jettisoned aircraft into the ocean, pushing perfectly good Avengers and Wildcats over the side to reduce topside weight and improve stability. 17 aircraft went overboard in 90 minutes. Each one cost $130 US. Nobody hesitated. Below in the engine room, Chief Machinist's mate Gordon Yates and his team worked to restart the starboard engine. The explosion had severed control lines and fractured steam pipes. They rigged bypass systems using spare parts and wire, rebuilding the engine control mechanism by hand, while the ship listed and fires burned 3 decks above them. At 7:43 p.m., the starboard engine restarted. Card shuddered, lurched forward, and began moving at 4 knots. The list decreased to 8 degrees as water shifted in the flooded compartments. By midnight, the fires were out. The flooding was contained. The ship was moving at 9 knots, heading for Bermuda and emergency repairs. Casualties: 19 dead, 34 wounded. Somehow, the ship survived. U-338 didn't. 4 hours after the torpedo attack, while Card's crew was still fighting fires, 3 Avengers from USS Card, Card's sister ship operating 40 miles east, located U-338 attempting to flee the area. The submarine was running on the surface at maximum speed, trying to escape before additional American aircraft arrived. The Avengers attacked in a coordinated pattern Corso had designed 3 months earlier, 2 planes from opposite directions, forcing the submarine to choose which threat to evade. U-338 dove, but not fast enough. 1 depth charge detonated 15 feet from the conning tower, rupturing the pressure hull. U-338 sank in less than 3 minutes. No survivors. Manfred Kinzel was 29 years old. He left behind a wife and infant son in Wilhelmshaven. German records recovered after the war show that Kinzel's son, Klaus, eventually became a marine biologist. He spent 40 years studying North Atlantic ecosystems. He never spoke publicly about his father. Card limped into Bermuda on September 18, 1943. Navy inspectors estimated repairs would take 6 months. Instead, Captain Isbell's crew, working around the clock, often improvising solutions with materials scrounged from other ships, got Card back to operational status in 67 days. The carrier returned to convoy duty in late November 1943. She would go on to sink 8 more U-boats before the war ended. Her crew earned a Presidential Unit citation, but the September 14th attack changed something fundamental in escort carrier operations. After Card's near sinking, the Navy implemented dispersed carrier protocols. Instead of single carriers operating with convoys, they deployed pairs or trios spread across wider areas. If one carrier was attacked, others could continue operations without interruption. The Germans never came close to sinking another escort carrier for the remainder of the war. Daniel Thorne, still at Norfolk training new crews, received detailed reports on Card's damage and recovery. He used the incident as a case study in his training curriculum, emphasizing the importance of damage control preparation. Many of the officers he trained would later credit that training with saving their ships during kamikaze attacks in the Pacific. But Thorne himself never spoke about it publicly. When Dr. Kemp interviewed him in 1967 and asked about Card's survival, Thorne's response was brief. "Good crew, good captain, they did what needed doing." Kemp pressed, "But your tactics created the conditions that made escort carriers valuable enough for Germany to target them specifically. Do you feel any responsibility for the men who died?" Thorne was silent for nearly a minute. Then, "I feel responsible for the men who lived, the ones on merchant ships who made it home because we were there. Raymond Chen died so those men could live. The crew of Card nearly died so those men could live. That was the job, that was always the job." It was the longest answer he gave during the entire 4-hour interview. If this story moved you, we need you to do something. Hit that like button, not just for us, but for Daniel Thorne and Raymond Chen and the thousands of sailors who fought and died in the cold water of the North Atlantic. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling these stories, and drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you knew about escort carriers before today. Tell us if someone in your family served in this war. These men didn't fight for glory. They fought because it needed to be done. The least we can do is remember them. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping their memory alive.